Think about a moment when you said something honest, something thoughtful, maybe even profound, only to be met with silence. Not disagreement, not argument, just a blank stare, a laugh, a quick scroll. Now imagine living in that moment, constantly. You notice the cracks in conversations that never go deeper than weather and trending outrage. You see through the buzzwords, the viral slogans, the manufactured urgency. And at first, it feels like clarity, like you've been given a secret key to the inner machinery of the world. But then, slowly, it begins to feel like X. Because the more you see, the less you belong. The more you think, the more alien the world becomes. What happens when depth becomes a burden? When clarity isolates instead of connects? What if the ability to think critically isn't just a gift? What if it's a kind of curse? This is the quiet tragedy of the modern intellectual, a person who still believes ideas matter in a world designed to flatten them. Someone who sees through the surface, but lives surrounded by it. In this video, we'll explore why thinking deeply in a shallow age can lead to disconnection, exhaustion, even despair. And yet, we'll also ask whether there's a deeper kind of freedom hidden inside that very exile. Because to be awake in a sleeping world is painful, but it may also be sacred. To understand this experience, we turn to Theodor Adorno. Adorno wasn't the kind of philosopher who wrote for applause. He didn't chase popularity. He didn't simplify. Living through fascism, war, exile, and the rise of mass media, Adorno saw something the world didn't want to see. That culture itself, our music, films, even conversations, had become a machine. A soothing, numbing, mass-produced machine that rewarded conformity and punished thought. He wrote, "Intelligence is a moral category." To him, thinking clearly wasn't just about being clever. It was an act of resistance, a refusal to become hypnotized by the rhythms of consumerism, celebrity, and noise. But he also knew, this kind of resistance comes at a cost. You don't get to live easily inside a system you've seen through. You end up caught between two painful choices, numbness or alienation. And that's where our story begins. Not in a library or a lecture hall, but in the quiet ache of someone who can no longer play along. Imagine waking up in a world that no longer speaks your language, not literally, but spiritually. You hear words, yes, see faces, respond to messages, but everything feels strangely flattened, muted, as if the world has been wrapped in a layer of plastic, shiny, smooth, and completely impenetrable. You try to speak about something real, loneliness, beauty, injustice, silence, but the conversation ricochets off the surface. Someone changes the subject, makes a joke, glances at their phone. You're left holding the weight of a thought no one asked for. What if your greatest strength, your ability to think, to feel deeply, to question, has become the very thing that isolates you? Because we don't live in a world that rewards depth. We live in a world that runs on speed, on spectacle, on simplicity. A world where content is consumed faster than it can be felt. Where scrolling replaces searching. Where meaning is trimmed to fit a caption. And silence is a glitch we rush to fill. Look around. We've built systems that train us to look without seeing, to speak without saying, and to nod without understanding. We mistake noise for connection, and convenience for truth. And the person who dares to slow down, to ask why instead of what, to linger instead of swipe, is quietly left behind. You've felt it, haven't you? That strange tension at a dinner table when you bring up something that matters, and it dies on the plate. The ache of realizing most conversations are performances, not exchanges. The fatigue of translating every thought into something digestible. Of knowing that what makes you feel most alive also makes you the most alone. This is where Theodor Adorno's warning echoes louder than ever. He saw it coming long before we had screens in our pockets. That mass culture doesn't just entertain us, it pacifies us. It flattens nuance, dulls contradiction. It makes thinking feel burdensome and shallowness feel like relief. And there's a reason it works so well. Psychologically, the human brain is wired to seek simplicity. When faced with uncertainty, we crave patterns, familiarity, closure. It's called cognitive fluency, the tendency to prefer things that are easy to process. This is why we click headlines that tell us what to think, why we avoid nuance like a shadow in a well-lit room. Dopamine too plays its role. Every like, every ping, every new post hits the reward circuit in the brain, just enough to keep us coming back, not enough to satisfy. We are overstimulated but undernourished, plugged in but empty. And so those who think slowly, speak hesitantly, question loudly. They don't just seem different. They become friction in a world designed to glide. No wonder deep thinkers often feel like ghosts in their own culture. Not because they're wrong, but because they see what others have learned to ignore. And maybe that's where it gets personal. Have you ever caught yourself dumbing something down just to be understood? Held back a thought that felt too much? Laughed at something you didn't find funny, just to stay inside the circle? Do you ever feel like you're performing a version of yourself that people can more easily consume? What does it cost us? To be legible but not whole. To be seen but not known. Maybe you've learned to speak the language of lightness, even when you're carrying something heavy. Maybe your silence isn't confusion, but protection. And maybe you've started to believe that something's wrong with you for wanting more meaning, more connection, more real. But what if there's nothing wrong with you at all? What if the pain isn't proof of your failure to adapt, but a signal that you were never meant to? But what if the pain isn't proof of your failure to adapt, but a signal that you were never meant to? You're not alone in this. Others have wandered through the same fog. Simone Weil once wrote, "To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul." And yet the modern intellectual, like a tree planted in concrete, feels the ache of wanting depth in a world that rewards only growth. Albert Camus, too, saw the absurdity of trying to make sense in a senseless world. He believed the thinker's task wasn't to fix the world, but to refuse to look away from its contradictions. "To live is to keep the absurd alive," he wrote. And perhaps that's what we're doing, keeping the tension alive, resisting the temptation to dissolve it into simplicity. Even Kierkegaard, writing in the 19th century, warned of the same danger. He feared a public that would trade passion for opinion, depth for chatter. A culture where everyone talks, but no one listens, where the thinker becomes a stranger in their own time. This isn't a new problem, but the speed and scale of modern life have made it feel sharper, more isolating, and more inescapable. Because when a culture turns against thought, it doesn't do it with violence. It does it with entertainment, with endless novelty, with the subtle message that anything difficult must be irrelevant, and anyone who insists otherwise must be difficult too. And so we learn to shrink, to edit our thoughts into captions, to perform joy even when we feel numb, to confuse being liked with being understood. But the consequences don't stay online. In a world that flattens everything, we begin to flatten ourselves. We lose the muscle to sit with uncertainty, the courage to hold complexity. We become allergic to silence and terrified of stillness. We scroll through distraction after distraction, but wonder why we feel more anxious, more empty, more unreal. Studies now show what Adorno suspected long ago, that the more time we spend immersed in shallow media, the more we struggle with focus, mood, even empathy. A 2023 study published in Nature Communications linked fragmented digital consumption with increased emotional volatility and decreased life satisfaction. We're not just overstimulated, we're spiritually fragmented. And the modern intellectual, the sensitive observer, feels this fracture more acutely, because they haven't numbed themselves to it. They still feel the tension, still notice the noise, still ache for something deeper. But maybe that ache is the beginning. The first sign that something inside you is still alive, that you haven't given up on meaning. That part of you still believes that thought and truth and depth matter. So here's where the shift begins, not with action, but with awareness. What parts of yourself have you been silencing to stay comfortable in this culture? When was the last time you followed a thought all the way to the end, without shrinking it to fit a screen? Have you been measuring your ideas by their truth, or by how engaging they'll be? Start to notice these things. Notice when you reach for distraction instead of reflection. Notice when you feel that tug to say something real and swallow it. Notice when you begin to disappear just to stay visible. Because noticing is the first act of resistance. The quiet rebellion that says, I still want to feel deeply. I still want to know what's real. But noticing is the first act of resistance. The quiet rebellion that says, I still want to feel deeply. I still want to know what's real. Now imagine a different kind of life. One not built around being understood by everyone, but around understanding yourself. A life where silence isn't feared, but honored. Where solitude becomes sacred instead of shameful. Where you're no longer trying to shrink your mind to fit the room. You build a room wide enough to hold your mind. Imagine walking through the world without flinching from its complexity, letting things be messy, letting thoughts take their time, speaking not to be liked, but to be honest, and surrounding yourself, not with noise, but with people, places, and moments that nourish the inner life, noticing beauty again, following curiosity without an end point, letting yourself wonder without needing an answer right away. This isn't a retreat from life, it's a return to it. So where do we begin? Start small. Start inward. First, guard your attention like it's sacred. Because it is. Limit the stream. Carve out space where the algorithm cannot reach you. Let your mind wander without being pulled. That's where original thought begins. Second, speak slower. Even in your own head. Give language time to catch up with meaning. Don't rush to reduce everything into something clever or shareable. Not every thought needs to be seen. Some are meant to be kept. Third, befriend your solitude, not the numbing kind, the kind where you meet yourself again. Read something difficult and let it change you. Write something no one will read. Sit with a question for days, even if it hurts. And finally, choose depth over ease, even when no one's watching. Because this world desperately needs people who still feel, still care, still think. And you, if you've made it this far, you're probably one of them. Remember that moment from the beginning? That feeling of speaking honestly and being met with silence? What if that silence wasn't rejection? What if it was space? Space that others don't know how to fill, yet. But you do. And maybe that's your task now. Not to change the whole world, but to keep depth alive inside yourself, even when the world forgets. Because someone has to. Someone has to be the one who still sees clearly, still listens deeply, still believes in meaning. Why not you? If this message found you in the quiet space between thoughts, write in the comments, I refuse to be translated. That's how I'll know you've felt the weight of thinking in a world built to forget. Tell me where your mind resists the flattening, what truths you've buried to fit in, what questions still burn beneath the surface. This place is not for noise, but for those still carrying something real. The transformation has already begun, even if no one else can see it. Keep going. The next step is waiting in the video that follows.